the club. We got you mid cough. How are you doing,
I'm trying
Professor?
really hard not to cough before you said hi.
Like as soon as we start, a big sneeze or something. Anyway, what a pleasure to see you.
Great to see you.
So the like school's out for summer. There's some nice old song that started like that,
Yeah,
or not yet.
not quite yet. We still have. I'm grading finals as we speak. I still
Oh my
have.
gosh, you're gonna be like a bummer mood. College professor grading finals podcast.
Well, there's a lot of weirdness about being in higher education right now, and students never stop changing. It. I always say like every 3 or 4 years, you really have to readjust everything you're doing because the kids are coming in are just completely different than they were a few years ago. But we're definitely seeing the fruition of some new trends. Uh,
Because of technology or because of culture?
Both. It's the convergence of technology and culture. So, on one hand, you have something we've talked about in the past, which is just this rampant credentialism. No one cares about learning. They just want to have. They want the credential that says they have pretended to learn, and the effect that this has on students is that learning is a stumbling block to getting what they want, and then I would say another cultural uh, backstop to that is that it's not just the students who are that way. It's often parents who 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 don't care if their kids learn anything. They just want the credential.
So,
And
Professor, it's not that I don't doubt you, but it does confuse me because clearly that can't be true in some degrees. I mean, an airline pilot or a building engineer or a nuclear fusionist. I mean, or there's got to be some skills out there, educational degrees that you have to actually know what you're doing, or the building falls down, or the plane crashes, or the surgery's botched. I mean, it does. So I'm
I would
not
say it's
positive
a
I'm
matter
understanding
of
your work.
yeah, it's a matter of degrees and percentages, but I don't know that any major is exempt from this as a trend. Um, that I mean, I could talk to people who are studying the hard sciences and engineering, and they see the same thing.
Huh.
So it's
So you've often said, and I assume you're being self-deprecating on that, but maybe there's a little truth to every joke. You have often said that you're lazy.
well, yeah, I'm being a little bit
Right,
self-deprecating, but I'm
right,
not truly lazy.
right,
I'm
right.
pretty fairly productive. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But there is like a little truth to that. That if there's a shortcut, and you can accomplish the same goal. I mean, I think it was called Cliff Notes. Yeah, I'm sure it was called Cliff Notes. There were
Mhm.
books in college that I didn't want to read that whole stupid philosophy book, so I read the Cliff Notes on it. And actually the Cliff Notes were really helpful because it had little insights that I don't know if I would have ever gotten. Um, isn't it
Oh,
the same thing?
I guess and maybe this is a deeper question, but I guess it just depends on what your goal is. When will you think that you've accomplished what you've accomplished, and what is it you're trying to do? And Jake, get your I want you to find the Calvin Coolidge quote that says, "Work is not a curse." I bet
Hmm,
you could Google that pretty quickly and
I've never heard that one.
find that. But there is no royal road, meaning there are no shortcuts to learning. There just aren't. And so Jake just found the quote, and I love it. Work is not a curse. It is the prerogative of intelligence, the only means to manhood, and the measure of a civilization. Savages do not work. The growth of a sentiment that despises work is an appeal from civilization to barbarism. And what I'm, and if you think that what you're doing is avoiding work, then that's not really a shortcut because you're not getting anywhere. It's like, I don't know, is this a shortcut? Well, I don't know. It drops us off in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Like, well, that's not a shortcut, right? Because it doesn't help you get to where you'd like to go. Something that helps you work more efficiently is, that's a tool. That's a productivity tool. But something that helps you avoid doing the intellectual work required is something that's actually robbing you of the thing that adds value to your life and the thing that human beings contribute to civilization. I mean, and we both are, Arthur Brooks fans, but you're robbing people of the ability to do something that's actually required for human happiness. So Coolidge is more right than he knows when he says the growth of a sentiment that despises work is an appeal from civilization to barbarism. Because if you say, no, I would like to avoid doing this hard work, I want to avoid learning. And I mean, more than just avoidance, there really is a sentiment that is anti-learning, anti-learning credentialism. Um,
Hmm,
and
that's interesting. That's kind of an anti-learning.
Yeah, and it has its, helpmate in education. So it's not just the parents who are like this, and it's not just the kids. In fact, the kids are probably the most innocent party in this. Um, it, and the government rewards pretending to accomplish things. And so educational institutions are heavily incentivized to pretend to do things. And parents, not because they hate their kids, but because they love their kids, have been told you need to get this credential. You need to check this box. And if you check this box, your kids will be okay. And because parents love their children, they think that anything that gets in the way of checking this box is bad.
So, Professor, I'm trying. Let's take another couple minutes on this, and then
Yeah.
we'll get to the
Sorry.
topic at hand.
Yeah, I didn't
Uh,
either. I didn't know what we're talking about. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm not positive either, but it's this conversation does resonate with me because my father gave me advice in 1982 that said you just have to go to college, and I don't care what degree you get in, and just get a degree. He got kicked out of DU and ended up getting drafted in the Korean War. I don't know. He thought the Korean War would be better than working at or studying at DU. So anyway, he didn't want me to do that same thing. So he just said you have to go to college, get a degree, and the reason he just needed a degree, I assume it's the same thought, is that no one can ever take it away from you that it will always be associated with you. You can sin, you can make mistakes, you can err, but you'll always have that degree as part of you. And so anyway, I got a degree and I'm happy, and it was good enough to get into law school as well. But is that how is it different today than what my father's advice to me?
Well, you had to run the gamut, and when you went to college, and there were teachers who you had to modify your character and produce work, and meet the standards of hundreds of different professors in order to achieve your degree. So I know this sounds redundant, but your degree has value because it was hard, because it required work. Uh,
Okay, let me give you one more to prove you're wrong.
okay.
And by the way, you're in for many classes. You're right. I did have to do some hard work, and I learned some stuff. So you're mostly right. But and I'm not bragging on this. Well, actually, I am bragging on this one. And tell me how evil I am. Um, Intro to a freshman year. Intro. No, I was a sophomore. I was smart at this time. So i.e., the word sophomoric. I was really smart, and it was within a bunch of freshmen. I was taking an intro to fiction class. Why I had to take that general ed, I don't know. I needed an intro to fiction class, and we had like 6 different books we could read, and the one I chose was Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. I ended up reading it, so maybe you're right. But before I read it, it's a novella. It's easy. Before I read it, I went to the library or the bookstore and got the Cliff Notes version of it. And I kind of skimmed that, and there was a note in there that said Francis Ford Coppola entirely plagiarized this novella into Apocalypse Now. And I went, oh, I haven't seen Apocalypse Now for a while. So I went and rented the movie from Blockbuster or whatever at the time. And then they assigned a class, and I knew these other freshmen. We had like six of us had to present to the class on Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. So I made us all wear dresses and ties and suits, or jackets at least. And we got to my house or my apartment, and I made them all drink beer, and I ordered in pizza, and we watched Apocalypse Now for 2 hours, and I read the main themes from the Cliff Notes, and then I said, "You're going to do this part. You're going to do this part." The teacher adored our group. She just thought we were the best thing ever because we professionally presented the importance of Heart of Darkness because it created a great movie called Apocalypse Now, and here are the similarities and differences, and here's what is it plagiarism or I don't know, I can't remember the speech. But anyway, I was just trying to be lazy. I didn't want to like study Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which I ended up did reading because I thought it was so enjoyable because of the movie. You seen which like whole paragraphs are just taken from Africa to Vietnam at different, 100-year difference or something. So anyway, tell me, am I just like the kids these days, or am I different?
No, because what you ended up doing was number one, you did read the book, and number two, the other thing is you took a lot of different sources of information and you put them together in a creative way. Meaning
But
you,
kids don't do some of that. I mean,
what's that?
AI or whatever they're doing isn't just a modern version of that.
Your brain did those things, though. It was your brain that made sense of the Cliff Notes. It was your brain that made sense of the novel. It was your brain that watched the movie. And it was your brain that took those sources and put them together in order to create a human created um,
Hmm.
uh, work product. And that means that learning was taking place. And it's just like people say, oh, I, you're either for AI or against it. And, like I'm not anti-AI. Um, I I use it for Google searches all the time. It's very good at answering simple binary questions in the same way that web page. It's just a
They're really
slightly
good
better
about
web page aggregator.
it.
But it has the same flaws that aggregating web pages would have, uh, and thus it is no substitute for human learning.
Yeah. Hmm.
Uh, and especially if you think that the goal of life, is goal of secular life at least, is setting aside family and religion, but the goal of your sort of secular life is to engage in creative and productive work, and thus you shouldn't use it to substitute for the thing that actually creates human happiness. I find that that's troubling at the very least. But
Yeah.
it's the other
It's
side of the coin. So that AI did not create the culture of credentialism. That is merely the modern twist that now currently is certainly it's going to create another educational divide because in many ways I'm at the cutting edge of many of these issues because I see such a broad spectrum of students that many other college professors don't see. And I can already tell the difference between students who, I mean, it's just basically literacy. Um, Students now, I would say, are in sort of three categories, which is literate, which means they're capable of actually engaging in a college education, and then the sort of like semi-literate, uh, and then completely illiterate. But you can now get away, I say get away with, but you're not really escaping the consequences of this. But the number of truly illiterate people in society is skyrocketing. And it's because nobody cares if they actually learn how to read. They just need to pretend that people know how to read. Uh, and the more we pretend, what we're going to get, and this is going to have long-term civic implications as well, is we're going to end up with a society of the illiterate society is lawless and servants. Um, the sort of semi-literate are going to be, um, you can envision them being in sort of non-competitive service, manufacturing, and government jobs. Um, and then the people who are fully literate are going to rule like kings.
So let me interrupt you, Professor Jake. Why did you pull up Philadelphia? Do you have it in for Philadelphia, or is that just you picked it out of a hat?
No, it's just so Tootle's brought up in the past that 1/3 of eighth graders in the country are functionally illiterate. So I feel like there's a lot of emphasis put on children not being able to read, but I did see the stat about Philly the other day. And I mean, to Tootle's point, if we don't do anything about child illiteracy, the adult illiteracy is just going to get worse and worse.
How is it conceivable that 52% of Philadelphians are functionally illiterate? That to me sounds impossible.
You've managed to live your, I mean, because systems are set up to just advance people with empty credentials. And it
Huh.
becomes, I mean, there, if you don't believe me, like throw a rock to your nearest school and ask them. Uh, I mean, and here's the other thing that sort of stinks is that, if you happen to live in an area where you have a lot of high functioning, um, highly educated, wealthy people who live around you.
All
Uh,
right, that's us. That's where I
yeah,
live.
right. You will not see this problem.
Okay, so you think I'm just blind to it? I'm naive to it.
Yeah, because you're going to find a school where parents care. But even at that school, I bet if you went and talked to the teachers on sort of off the record, they would tell you, "Oh no, there's an underclass that goes to this school who are being socially promoted, and and the percentages will be different." But I would be shocked if even at a wealthy school district with a high median income, if you didn't still have 20 or 30% of the students there who were illiterate and being socially promoted.
Yes, I'm surprised by this entire conversation. Okay, we got to move on though.
Yeah,
This
sorry, not to derail
no,
it,
this
but
is helpful.
I'm seeing it on my finals where I see their final exam in a blue book and it's essentially illiterate. And then they produce a paper that's perfect.
Yeah,
And you're like, no, no, no. This is what you actually sound like, when you put a pencil to paper, and yet you're able to produce something that is perfect.
yeah,
It's
yeah. That
because we have so many tools and able to and support systems, they would probably call them, to allow for the perception of learning.
right. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, this is helpful, and it's interesting. So thank you. So help put some context for some current events, if you don't mind. And you may not have great reactions, but I'm looking to see if a history professor views things any differently than I as a layman. And so it's a grab bag of things that are just in my head. I didn't write a single note today, but I'd like to just throw out some things to you and go, oh, yep, John always has been, always will. It's a curse of human nature, and we deal with it through our systems of criminal justice. And I mean, that could be an answer to the my. Well, let's start with a really bad one off the top of the head, and hopefully we'll build to some nicer ones. Um, assassinations, or it's I think this is an assassination, not a street crime. It's an
Mhm.
assassination. The couple in DC, where
I would go even further. It's terrorism.
yeah, yeah, terrorism is the most accurate word. You're right. Thank you. That stuff is just is always bothered me, whether it's the Oklahoma City bombing or the World Trade Center bombing or individual assassinations. The United Health Group CEO guy, this couple, but this couple really bothers. This murder of this couple really bothers me. So can you put some historical perspective behind terrorists and madmen and people who just go off the deep end and they think they can make a positive change in society? Can you is it always happened, always has, always will? Or no,
Sure.
there is ways to work our way through this somehow? Because it's so maddening. I don't, I'm beside myself.
Yeah, well, we have two Israeli embassy staff workers who were murdered, and the motivation for those murders was political terrorism. And I mean, all evidence points to this so far. Who knows? The investigation might uh, turn up something else in the future, but as of right now, that's what we think. Um, the answer is that we will always have people who want to engage in political violence, but the culture and the cultural incentives will determine where that political violence is pointed. So the fact that it is pointed at um, Israeli embassy staff members is because of the structural incentive. And I know this is going to sound even crazier, well, but it gets back to higher ed. The structural incentives created within higher education to create this culture of anti-Semitism among elites that is directing the culture in this way.
Well, so
So
you, not to get off this, well, yeah, this is your conclusion. So let me ask you a question on your conclusion. So President Trump is right then to remove international students from Harvard as a way of punishing them because they've created an environment of anti-Semitism at Harvard.
no, no, no. I don't know that.
Isn't that the direct connection? Isn't that exactly what he said and what he's
Well,
doing?
like many things, there is a social problem, but you know, he's targeting the wrong thing and doing it in a silly way. Um, no, the we've talked about this in the past, the identity trap that created this sort of um, pro-terrorism and excusing violence um, mentality that we have seen for many years among uh, elites that then creeps its way into um, society as it's the way that radical chic manifests itself. What's the cool way to be a radical? And where is violence okay? And elites do play a role in directing what political terrorists will eventually um, do to justify their actions. I, I, but I don't think that it's necessarily students. I wouldn't blame foreign students. That
Well,
seems
but
to be.
he's not. Well, I guess he is punishing the students, but he's trying to punish Harvard.
Well, I mean, I, okay, but it's the other thing is this focus on Harvard is just I get really tired of this focus on elite institutions because I guess it is true that elite institutions are cultural gatekeepers, but most of the um, most of what goes on in American education is happening at your state colleges.
Yeah.
It's not necessary. I mean, if you want to talk about what's actually affecting um, you know, people on the ground. I guess in the sense that your professors at CU Boulder are probably influenced by being Ivy Leaguers, you know, uh, and that then translates to, your average Colorado citizen. Um, it, but because it's going to find its way into University of Northern Colorado and Colorado State and Adams State and I can't name all the public four-year colleges and Colorado School of Mines. I don't know. Your public colleges are different than ours, but uh, so, but I wish that we would be paying more attention to what's going on at the colleges where students actually go to school, because what you get at each level is a dumber, cruder um, version of uh, of this structural hatred. It just gets it's just going to be the more violent bumper sticker version by the time it trickles down to your 18 or 19-year-old. Um, and I mean, I guess, yeah, I get it. That's why you go after the Ivy League schools, but there are elites in every college and university in America. And
Okay.
it's also like just because we've kind of forgotten what education is even supposed to do. It just drives me nuts when everybody thinks that you're supposed to go to college to get a job. You know, take a
Oh,
history
two
degree.
more lines on that. Go back to this terrorist situation and what
Yeah,
it's
sorry.
been historical. Give 2 lines on that point.
Well,
Yeah.
just that, of course, you'll have a president killed by a disgruntled office seeker. You'll have, you know, P- Puerto Rican nationalists take some shots at Harry Truman. You know, uh, Squeaky Fromm's going to go after Gerald Ford. Palestinians going to go after Robert Kennedy. Disgruntled Marxist loner takes out John Kennedy. So acts of political violence will always be with us. And historically, our system's done a good job of limiting these things rather than amplifying them. So if we're in a glass half full mood, let's remember that what our system has been really good at is preventing, stopping these assassinations from becoming massacres and massacres from becoming genocides. That's what pluralism does, is it hopefully the system discourages that. But the thing that we are becoming concerned with is when you have institutions that aren't discouraging this kind of behavior. Um, and that's something we should be concerned about.
And you're suggesting, per previous conversations, that's both on the left, and I'm using these words to your mind,
Yeah, yeah.
accurate, left and the right
It's
of
almost the
America.
definition of the left and the right, really. I mean, the I can't tell you how often you'll see pictures of, Che Guevara, right?
Mhm.
Or other celebrity murderers. Um, and people will say, well, I'm serious about this, I'm serious about advocating for violence. And then when challenged after something like this happens, you saw almost immediately again, radicals, leftists, you could call them fringe groups, are out there justifying this behavior. And when challenged, people say, why do you think we're wearing the shirts of these people who commit murders? We like people who commit murders. Um, and and I guess the thing that we should find shocking is um, post 1960s, how often we let people who have those beliefs rise to a very high level in society and culture and politics. The people who participated in the Weather Underground, because they were unsuccessful terrorists, they they weren't prosecuted and they were all allowed to enter civil society. If you look at what has happened to the Weather Underground since the 1970s, you'll see that all these people are unrepentant for the most part, as far as I know, and they hold jobs in elite colleges and universities. And you know, President Obama associated with many of them. President Clinton flirted with them, and and this is different from what they had to do as president when you have to deal with unsavory countries and make peace with, bad allies. This is completely separate, um, but the kinds of people who politicians surround themselves with now is just culturally completely unacceptable.
Well, it's isn't it the flip side of this very same coin, pardoning all the
Yeah,
January 6ers?
yeah, but I mean, but I wouldn't even say you don't even need to flip the coin over. It's just the same side of the same
Same
coin.
side of the same
Yeah,
coin.
like Joe Biden pardoning people on a list handed to him by some activist group, or again, it's the same thing. You don't even need to flip the coin over.
Hmm. So when I served in the army, there was I think it was when I became an officer. Now when you're enlisted, I don't think they care. They just want to know whether you can walk in here. But I'm not sure that's true. There was a test and etc. I did have to do some stuff to get in.
Yeah,
But
you
when
have.
an officer, it was a little bit more vigorous. You have to take a secret clearance, and you have to fill out forms and stuff. And neighbors have to tell on you whether you're a semi decent guy or something.
Yeah.
Um, it said, "Have you ever belonged to any group that is threatened the legitimacy of the United States?" That's not the exact word, but it's kind of the. Have you belonged to a group or subscribed or participated in any action that would be advocate the overthrow of the United States? And you have to put yes or no. And I assume if you put yes, I don't know, they might have some more questions of you, or maybe you don't. Maybe you don't become Lieutenant Brackney.
The only
Is
time I
that
ever had to sign anything like that was when I worked in Georgia. They still had that.
kind of a thing to make sure you're not going to
Yeah,
overthrow?
Georgia State, I had to sign one of those.
Well, my point by bringing that up is at a certain point, I can say all sorts of obnoxious stuff. But there is a threshold at some point where legitimate society says, no, let's not give him that job or not welcome in our church. Or I don't know. You can't be our Boy Scout leader. Or something, if there's a certain threshold. Is that what you're saying? That in many ways our threshold keeps getting lowered?
Well, especially if they're unrepentant, it's kind of like I mean, if you spend your entire life being a nutcase and you say, "Hey, I'm still crazy," let's maybe not make you a cabinet secretary.
Right.
Uh, and you can call that an escalation from the kinds of things that um, Biden did, or even Trump was willing to do in his first term.
Okay. Well, you started that being half full, and I'm not sure where I found the half full part,
Well, the
but
half full part is that America's still full of a bunch of normal, decent, nice people who find murder horrifying. And
okay,
if you were to ask them, do you think it's okay to murder two innocent people who were about to get married as they left work? They would all say, "Of course not. What are you, crazy?
yeah, it's
Who
like
are these?" And they would have the same reaction we have. I mean,
so
they would say,
it's not
"What?"
half full, it's 99.9% full, or
Yeah, one would hope. I mean, I used to take I used to always say like I'll get scared when we see 36 million people, when it's more than 36 million people are wackos, because 10% of Americans don't believe that the moon landing happened.
right.
So 36 million people can make a lot of noise. The problem over the last 20 years is that we're letting those people be in charge of things now. I mean,
Okay.
they're running our political parties. They're running our media institutions and our institutions of higher learning. Like the problem is not that crazy people exist. Crazy people have always existed. We just didn't put them in charge.
Okay. I think that's a good segue to my next one. Thank you for that topic, because I really am, well, I'm perturbed every time this kind of stuff happens. Every time I have deja vu all over again. I just really disturbing to me when somebody
The
hurts and
same way, I'm sure you remember this, but I've always had kind of a soft spot for Sikhs, who
mm,
are just the greatest American citizens you can imagine. And as a society and a culture, like I love Sikh people and Sikh culture. Anyway, and when at certain times yahoos attack Sikhs,
yeah.
first of all, you shouldn't be attacking anybody, but it always just struck me as the perfect distillation of ignorance and hatred, you know, to after 9/11 Sikhs were being targeted, and I, yeah, it's right to be outraged because, by the way, John, I'll remind you, we're the real Republicans, John. We're the ones who believe in liberty to all, right? And that means that we're outraged when a couple of, innocent people were murdered outside of their embassy, and when a CEO is murdered, and when Sikhs are attacked, or when when people aren't given their due process rights that they're entitled to. Like, we're supposed to be outraged by these things. We're supposed to be better than that.
That
We're
was
supposed
another
to
one
be the
of
ones
my
who
topics.
stand up for liberty to all.
Let's just take that in 1 minute or two. Um, we really should be concerned, right? I mean, all Americans should be concerned about saying something about someone. They're in a gang, or they're a bad person. They may be. They truly may be a bad person. I don't know. But taking them and putting them in a foreign prison for an indefinite sentence, and we're paying for it. That just seems so alien to me that that's like accepted among a major percentage of our population. Am I wrong that it just seems alien? I mean, yes, we should lock them up, or we should deport them, or lock them up and deport them, or lock them up and not deport them. I mean, there's lots of options, but sending to a foreign prison, Libya or Guantanamo or El Salvador, that just seems so alien to me. Am I wrong? I don't get it.
Well, I mean, it's a failure of education because that is the principle that has to be taught, right? Because everybody's born believing in rewarding friends and punishing enemies, and bad guy goes to jail, right? You don't have to be taught that. And what you have to be taught is that no, you can't just say, all I care about is the credential. All I care about is the end result. You have to also care about the process. You have to care about the ideals and the process and the end result. And you don't just get to throw one of those things away when it becomes inconvenient. So, that's why I disagreed with our visitor from a couple of weeks ago. This idea that somehow we just worship power and doing things. Like, to what end? You have to care about process, and you have to care about the goal, uh, and you have to care, and you don't get to toss these things aside when one of them becomes inconvenient, because um, and this is a difficult concept to grasp, but like in America, the institutions, our civic institutions are the principles. It's the process, that is the principle. Those are the principles. You don't get to say, well, I believe in democracy so much that I want to destroy democracy. Like, this has always struck me as strange about these integralists who say, I believe in natural law so much that I want to destroy the United States of America, or I'm so patriotic I want to destroy America. Like, no, that is bizarre. To love America, to be patriotic, means that you have to care about the ideals and the peaceful implementation of these ideals. You don't get to just throw away the Constitution or the Declaration. You got
But
to have
it's
a
an invasion, Professor.
pardon.
It's an invasion.
That's it. And there's also another thing that drives me nuts is this like idea that we have to take dumb ideas seriously. Like, when people say that, I don't, we'll get an explicit rating for this, but I just want to say, get the F out of here. Like, you don't even believe this BS that you're saying to me right now. So just stop it. Like, either you're so effing dumb that let's just, I'm not even gonna have this conversation, because you're either a moron, like a complete, like, drooling moron, or you're evil. And in
Well,
which
Professor,
case, there's no point in talking to you.
well, it was a direct quote from the President of the United States. It's
I
not just some.
know, but nobody believes it's true. I
Okay,
mean,
I've got to interrupt you.
100 of those people, and the only people who believe that would be true, has got to be people with an IQ so low that they can barely function.
Okay, I've got to interrupt you.
Nobody with two brain cells to rub together. If you were to if God was operating the lie detector, he would say, "You are lying. You do
Okay,
not believe
I'm going to
that."
interrupt you, Professor, because I think you're wrong. But you're passionate and eloquent on this point. I think you're wrong, though, and I'm going to prove it to you. Bart. Bart,
Wait,
are you with
you're
us?
not going to use Bart as the
I'm
example.
going
And
to use him as
Yes.
my subject matter expert.
yeah, I don't like where this is going, Bart. I would
I
be
know.
offended.
I think he's going to smoke you. Ready?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Um,
Yes.
I liked Professor's passion on this, but I think he's wrong. And the reason I think he's wrong is because I read part of the filings. You may not have. You're a busy lawyer, but the Department of Justice lawyers are arguing in court that the act this is accurate and we're under an invasion. And these are court filings. They're officers of the court, and they're filing in legal pleadings and I think oral arguments. Am I right or wrong?
You're right, actually. Yeah, they are. I haven't actually seen a document yet where they've talked about the so-called invasion, but they are seriously making arguments that just can't really be backed up with facts, and yeah, I think there's a problem there.
Yeah.
There's,
But Bart, I mean, you might have been watching this more carefully than I am, and correct me if I'm getting this wrong. But the administration is getting angry with the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court is, for the first time in history, not treating the Solicitor General's office as if they are acting in good faith. So that means that the Supreme Court knows that the Solicitor General's office is lying about this.
yeah.
And they all just have to pretend that they don't know that the Solicitor General's office is just lying.
Yeah, well, I
It's
think
been
you're
ordered to
starting
lie.
to, the oral argument that happened last week on one of those, I think it's the case everybody's calling the birthright citizenship case. There were a few moments there where several of the justices, even the more conservative ones, were just basically calling the Solicitor General out.
Yeah.
And I heard somebody last week speaking about the fact that the Solicitor General is the only lawyer in the U.S. who actually has an office in the Supreme Court building, but that if the Solicitor General is not careful, they might be making that office into an event space or something.
Yeah.
Fairly soon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because
So-
I think the Solicitor General
So
is.
trust me, if the Supreme Court didn't care about cursing, they would have said what I just said.
Right.
That's probably
They would have
correct.
said to the Solicitor General, "Get the F out of here."
So
No
you're-
one believes that what you're saying is true.
Yeah.
So you're saying the president doesn't believe it either. He's doing this for showmanship to scare people from coming into the country or getting them to self-deport. I mean, that's the reason.
Well,
Or
he knows what he wants to accomplish. He's like, "Get these people out. I promise to get these people out." And then he's just ordering it to happen. But he either doesn't know or doesn't care, and is completely disinterested in the idea that, that there's a procedure to follow. And Jake's got his hand. What, Jake, what you got?
Well, and it's interesting because Trump has brought up how Obama deported like 12 million people when he was president. And he's like, well, if Obama can deport that many people, I should be able to deport even more. But it's like, okay, but Obama went through the due process. He went through the proper channels. So that means if you go through the proper channels, you also can deport as many
Correct me if
people.
I'm wrong. These are administrative courts, right? So the due process would take place in the court system operated by the executive branch. Like, wouldn't it? You need to say yes, not just nod, because it's a podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was not-
Absolutely.
Yeah.
On the Supreme Court, in several of its orders on this issue, has basically said that in every one of the orders. They've said, okay, you can't use the Alien Enemies Act the way you're using it, but you could use other, legal administrative procedures.
Act. Yeah.
Right. You just can't say we will have no process for for deporting people.
Yeah, or you can't hand people a piece of paper with an hour to go before they're going to be forced onto a plane and say that's due process.
Yeah. So, okay. So maybe we are on the same page. That no one believes it, including the president. He's trying to make a point or fulfill a campaign promise, or he's trying to be bold or whatever he's trying to do.
I just think he doesn't care. He does not care. He does not care about the rules, right? He doesn't care about the Constitution. He doesn't care about the
There's
law.
all sorts of people, even those crazy people, there's still all sorts of people that surround him. I'm literally thousands of people that surround him that do care about the rules. No?
I mean, I don't know about
Hey,
that.
really?
Again, you guys are shaking your heads. This is a podcast. You have to say no.
No.
Really?
Well, okay. Did you see Christy Nome had like a Senate hearing or something the other day? And there was a senator that asked her, like, can you define for me what habeas corpus means? And her response was, habeas corpus means the president has the power to like enforce the law and deport people. And so it's like, whether she actually believes that's the purpose of habeas corpus, like the definition, or she's just drinking the Trump Kool-Aid, it doesn't matter, because if he can convince enough of the cabinet that whatever he believes is now the law, that's how they're going to enforce the law.
Mm-hmm.
This show, today we only have 4 of us on, and it's 3.5 conservatives. Bart, sorry, you're only a half conservative. You're also, so, Stephen, Professor, there's 3.5. Are we sure we're not a liberal podcast? This doesn't sound like a conservative podcast to me.
No, because we're trying to preserve the American system of government.
Yeah.
We are the conservatives. It's everybody else has gone nuts, but not us.
All right, thank you. I just want to put that on the record occasionally. I know you said.
I do think the vast majority of Americans would also, if politicians were presenting them with a reasonable alternative, they would take it.
Okay, I got to do two more topics, and then, as I said before we went on air, I was going to forget 3, and I haven't. But I just want to do 2 more today, and then see what Jake, you, and Bart would have brought up besides this. So only 2 current topics that are relevant that I'd like to get some historical perspective on. This one, I think I should probably end with this, but I want to do it now. The Pope. It is pretty cool to have an American Pope. I'm not a Catholic. I'm an Episcopalian, but I think it's pretty cool because no one said it could ever happen until the United States started to go into decline. Who is that author of that quote? The new Pope. And he said it in the 80s. So there will never be an American Pope until the American society goes into decline. So anyway, Professor, you're not a Catholic either, but can you give some historical, is it important to have an American Pope, or is he just a woke guy that we're mad and his brother's good but he's bad? I mean, I don't know. Do we care about a Pope?
I think it matters to, I guess, yeah, of course it matters. He's the leader of one of the largest world religions. And I think rightfully people who grew up with him and knew him take pride in his amazing story. But he's also somebody who is a citizen of another country, who really rose up in the church in South America. So of course he is an American Pope, but he's also a Peruvian Pope as well. So I don't mean to sort of take any sort of jingoistic national pride in there being an American Pope, but I do think it's important in a sense that you will have a Pope who's able to speak to the English-speaking world as a native English speaker. And I think that will be important for communicating a unifying message for as long as he's in charge of the church. So But as for everything else, I'll just say I'll withhold any judgment. I tend to think that Catholics are entitled to their own pope without some Presbyterian weighing in on it. You know,
Yeah, but he seems to care about poor people quite a bit, and I don't know. That seems woke.
I don't know why that would even seem woke. I mean, aren't we all supposed to care about poor people? I don't know. I don't know what. Yeah, I don't see that as that is not. Uh, the woke don't have a monopoly on caring about poor people, and I don't know. Yeah, Jesus cared about poor people. Jesus cares about poor people.
Okay.
Um, so
Well, can
that's not one
conservative
of the defining characteristics of wokeism. In
can
fact, I guess I
conservative
would say like most woke people don't really care about poor people.
Yeah, okay, cool. Now we're on the same page. Can conservatives care about poor people?
Of course, especially with the conservative mantra we often repeat here that politics is downstream of culture. You know, that we absolutely need to care about cultural issues because they're all are going to have political implications, and culture is really the most determining the factor that determines poverty more than anything else. It's not as much. I mean, my old advisor actually used to ask this as a question when we would
Is this
uh,
Alonzo Hansby?
Alonzo Hamby, and I remember he asked this question in a seminar. You know, he started our 3 hour discussion this way: Is poverty a lack of money? You
Hmm.
know, and the short answer is, well, we know that if you are poor, you lack money. But what we should care about is the dynamic human experience, because we should find it amazing to look at a country like Poland or Latvia or Lithuania or Estonia, which are countries that were essentially impoverished third world countries that are now, um, I mean, Poland is an economic miracle. And it's not resources that determine the wealth that determines the wealth of nations or the prosperity of a citizenry. And just to bring it back to education, like the you should care about your educational institutions primarily because actually teaching people how to read is what gets them out of poverty, not pretending to. Uh, and uh, yeah, I see no ground on caring about poverty. I would say that, in fact, I think that's what motivated both of us to get into the world of AEI. It wasn't
Mhm.
so much, you know, I'm not a. I think capitalism is too limited of a term. That's why I don't. I say I defend peace, not capitalism. Um, but uh, it, but the consequence of people living peacefully should be that's what allows poor people to not be poor anymore. You know, that people without a monopoly on violence don't get to oppress people without resources. Uh, and so
Yeah,
I
that I think that's a powerful message you've given us over 4 years of discussions we woven in there. I think that's really important. So one last topic, because I want to see if Bart and Jake, and I wanted to see if you have any current event topics that we should be thinking about as citizens. But my last topic is this big beautiful budget bill. My only aspect that well, no, I care about a lot of little aspects of it, but I I think I've been involved in Fix the Debt for at least a decade, but I think it's been 15 years and I've been back to Washington. I used to train people on how to have citizens understand the debt and why it's important, deficit and debt. So I'm concerned that with a Republican House and a Republican Senate and a second term Republican president, we're increasing the debt by at least I don't know, 2.5, is it trillion? It's a lot of money, and it probably is 5 trillion if you make it permanent over. Yeah, I have concerns. Do you have concerns historically about the nation's deficit and debt right now, historically, or
yes,
and you're just paranoid?
because we just passed another threshold where interest on the debt is now larger than things like Medicare and Medicaid now. I mean, we are going to hit a point where we can't pay the interest on our debt, and it could lead to the collapse of the American economy. I don't, I, and we
Oh, but
will eventually hit a point where we can't do this anymore.
so okay, there's two of us. Me, I just raised the question, and you just gave a short answer. So two out of the 330 million Americans seem to care about this. No one else does, apparently.
Right.
Well, what's going on? Why are we? We're. I mean, the
Because until it's a problem, nobody's going to have an incentive to fix it.
well, but
So it's
really,
like it's like my students who cheat. They, as long as they get away with it, they keep doing it. And it's only when they get caught that all of a sudden, uh, and then their defense is often, well, why am I the one being punished? I I got away with it for so many years. Uh, in other words, and you say, what about those baby boomers who did this? And what about these millennials who did, and you start blaming previous generations, but it will, I mean, it's going to feel very unfair to the people who experience the consequence of this. Uh,
well, but
and
it's probably not some distant people that we've never heard of or conceived of. It's our kids and their kids. It's within a generation or two. They can't be sustainable for a century.
Well,
It,
I would have thought that we were going to hit this about 10 years ago,
right.
believe it or not. Because I thought that there would be some consequence when we went over 100% of GDP, because no civilization has ever survived with that kind of a debt level.
And the only
Um,
reason that we are is because all the other countries around, not all, most of the other countries around the world are in similar or worse situations, right?
yes and no, but one thing that these trade discussions have kind of outlined is that the United States of America is by far the most important economy in the world. That is a fact,
Yeah.
but uh, that still means that 73% of the financial power of the world is outside of the United States. So if we act as if we are 73% of the world's economy rather than 27% of the world's economy or 23% of the world's economy, I can't remember. But eventually, it, when you're providing an incentive for 80% of the world to find an alternative to you, eventually the 80% of the world will find an alternative to you.
Yeah. So you're a little doomer gloomer on the tariffs thing, which wasn't my topic today, but you're a little doom and gloom, huh?
Well, we can't just continue to do things that are completely absurd and expect for there to be no consequences. I mean, we can't. Let's tie this all together up into a bow. You can't have the New York Times continue to lose credibility and then say, why is the New York Times losing credibility? You can't have CNN tell a bunch of lies and then say, oh, we're shocked that nobody listens to CNN, right? You can't have colleges give worthless degrees and still have people value those degrees. You can't, and you can't keep borrowing money forever without eventually having that have some consequence in your economy. The ev Eventually, reality will bite.
Hmm. So, Professor, you've often said that the one parts of the genius of the founding of our country and its systems that were executed in the Constitution, in with the noble aspirations of the Declaration, is that if we screw up, it doesn't cause the whole society to deteriorate, as in many countries, because of federalism and different branches of government and all sorts of different reasons. America's genius is in this cumbersomeness that doesn't give us everything we want right away. We have to fight for it, and it takes time, and it's a give and take, right? Is that a summary of your 4 years of conversations?
Yeah, okay, I'll accept that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and then I forgot my main point, but
Uh,
I was
but
trying to summarize.
I think where you were going with this, let me summarize what I think your question is. That uh, why isn't this happening now? Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
what's going on that is preventing that? And it's because the incentives are gone from the system, and that's why, in some ways, it's sort of sad because you could imagine uh, a good version of Trump could have been the president who actually um, used his willingness to break things in order to achieve meaningful reforms. I mean,
Yeah.
Donald Trump could have come
I think that's a true statement.
if someone willing to break with these norms could have actually come in and said, look, we're going to do something radically different. We cannot afford Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security the way it is currently funded and set up. So we're just going to convert. I mean, I'm just spitballing here. I'm not trying to solve our nation's problems, but we're just going to convert um, all federal spending on Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security to block grants set to being a percentage of current revenues that we just give to states and say, all right, states, you solve this problem with this money because we're getting out of this business because we are going bankrupt in this business, which is what you would do in life.
Mhm.
If there was a part of your business that had value, uh, but you were losing money doing it, you would shut it down and say we can't afford to do this anymore. And who knows, you might get better services if I mean, just imagine if the federal government said, all right, we're going to take Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and the funding level of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security put together is going to be 40% of the current revenues of the average current revenues over the past 10 years adjusted by population, and we're just going to send it to the states as a check. And we're going to dedicate 10% of current revenues towards paying off the debt, and all 10% to funding all that stuff that that people get outraged about, but is actually 5% of the federal budget, and then 40%. I don't know if my math's even adding up. 35% on defense, whatever. And that's just going to be the way it is because we want this government to be sustainable into the future. And this is the dramatic action that we have to take. But I just don't know if anybody, that's not what you're going to get. What you're going to get is a big, beautiful bill with everything in the kitchen sink thrown into it that just spends more money and kicks the problem down the road.
Well, and worse, that no one from the other side is coming along, and no one in the say middle. In some ways, I'm in the middle. In some ways, I'm just a conservative. So I don't know why I'd say that's the middle. Well, maybe I still think the country is a conservative country. Maybe it is the middle, but is going to be so repulsed over the next couple of years that they'll do something even worse. They'll put in all the spending that was cut, and we pay everybody back for not working for 3 years. Or I mean, and it will be even worse 3 years from now because we're not culturally thinking through this. We're not.
Yeah, and I'm worried that we don't have the cultural uh, cachet anymore, and that people will just throw out the baby with the bathwater and say, "Well, we've obviously proved that representative government doesn't work."
Yeah, but a significant portion of the Republican Party seems to have gotten to that point where they want some version of autocracy within whatever they think the framework of our Constitution is.
And
But
but I would also say in the Democratic Party too. I don't.
exactly, yeah, we're on this.
There's
Okay.
nobody arguing for. I mean, it strikes me as bizarre to hear the speeches they sometimes give, and talk about the founders. I'm like, why do you like the founders? Like, you don't have any of their belief. It seems strange. I kind of want to give my own version of the Frederick Douglass, speech about the 4th of July. Like, why are you guys celebrating the 4th of July?
Right.
You just like fireworks. You don't like the Declaration of Independence. I actually like the Declaration,
Yeah.
not just the
Okay,
fireworks and hot dogs.
I've got to interrupt us for a final time and see if Bart has any questions or comments or new topics that you wish I would have brought up. It could be attacks on the legal system. It could be, I mean, it could be anything you want. It doesn't have to be about law, Bart. Is there something from this conversation or your own thoughts in the last couple of weeks that you think we should be thinking about and we want Professor Tootle's historical context to it? Anything?
One thing, and this is really technical, so this is probably going to be a question that will be cut by one of our editors later because it's too boring.
Okay.
Stephen, early at the beginning of the conversation, kind of at the top of it, you were talking about literacy and all of that. And it's interesting. I'm just kind of focusing sort of on my own experience with literacy. I'm obviously literate because I practice law, so I read like all day long.
You wrote Colorado's laws for 4 decades.
Right, right. But interestingly enough, I kind of almost feel, and this is probably unjustified, but I almost feel as though I became as literate as I am in spite of the educational system. It's like when I was in like elementary school, I was not reading very well in grades 1 through 4. My parents figured that out. So they actually got a lady who lived down the street from me, who I guess had been a school teacher. I really don't know what her background was. She kind of worked with me every day for like an entire year until my reading skills improved. But to be really honest, I'm not sure I really learned how to like read and actually comprehend what I can comprehend today until I was probably about a year into law school.
Yeah.
And that's fairly frightening, isn't it?
Well, I sometimes say I didn't really learn how to read and write until the second year of graduate school, or the second year of my PhD program. So I had a
Yeah.
master's degree and I was in my second year of my PhD when I finally, I would say, learned how to read and write.
You guys are high achievers. I'm not sure I learned in college or law school. I think I was about my late 40s, maybe even early 50s. So you guys are high achievers, early achievers.
Yeah. Well, the thing I wanted your thought on real quickly is, to me, reading and writing and all of that is a developmental thing that you develop throughout your life. I mean, yeah, I guess there are some people who are just prodigies, and at the age of 3, they're writing books and various things. But the rest of us, it's kind of like you do the best you can, and the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Well, what I mean by literacy is not just the quality of being able to read and physically write, but it's also even has implications in verbal communication. So what I would say is that even if you weren't a good reader or a good writer, if I asked you, write one paragraph about what you ate for dinner last night, you could do that. What I mean now is that I'm encountering students who could not describe what they ate for dinner last night. And they
Wait,
couldn't
you mean verbally they can't describe what?
they couldn't do it in writing. And if you ask them, they would have a hard time even speaking in a way that was logical and coherent to even describe what they ate for dinner last night. Meaning you could take, if you were to take a transcript of what they said, because human beings are really good at picking up on verbal and nonverbal tics, and we're really good at interpreting verbal language, we would be able to understand what they had for dinner last night. But if you were to look at a transcript of what they actually said, they couldn't, in a coherent way, describe how they feel about coffee, or something that would require only personal information. And it's so it kind of goes beyond reading, because so often you'll give an instruction to somebody, and because they are illiterate, they don't even know what you're saying to them. I mean, I'll give you, I'm sure I've mentioned this example before, but when I was teaching the Star Spangled Banner, and I said, "Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?" And nobody knows what dawn is. And then what so proudly we hailed, they don't know what hail means, right? And that means that they do not understand what is happening. They are confused. And if you were to try to describe for them something like, this is how you rent a house, this is how you apply to college, or essentially they have to have somebody else do those things for them. And it becomes a barrier to entering any sort of like legitimate life, because you can't give them even instructions.
So, Professor, some of this is now resonating with me. I don't think privates in the army are dumb. Actually, I think a lot of them are pretty worldly. You know, they know a lot about stuff, fixing cars, and I mean, when I went down there, I was pretty impressed with the viciousness and the camaraderie and the ability to do certain things. But in the training for it, there were a lot of instances where it's not just left face, right face, because that's kind of a human trait that we all screw up on that. They could say left face and a third of us turn to the right, including me sometimes. It's a weird psychological thing. I'm talking about like how to place a claymore mine and the simplicity of the training front point towards enemy on what, and they still point it wrong. They're reading it front point towards enemy because maybe they couldn't read. But so that does resonate to me, that there are certain people that just don't know how to live life or do very simple training steps. So the army is pretty good at dumbing it down where we all build it up. It's massive repetition. And
But the difference between the army and college is that in the army, there's a consequence, and the person is trying to learn, right? And if they didn't point the claymore in the right direction, they wouldn't blame the sergeant. And the parents of that guy aren't going to come and try and get the sergeant fired for telling
see,
him,
it is really that bad these days.
yes.
Wow.
And their boss is not going to, and the lieutenant isn't going to come down to the lieutenant and say, why do we even have to have directions for
Right.
claymore? We're gonna drag you into a hearing where you have to defend the idea that claymores should exist, and you're like, you just look around and you say like, I'm just trying to get these guys to plant the mines so
Right.
the arrow's in the right direction.
Defensive position, yeah.
Right, and then people from a sergeant from the motor pool comes over and says, arrows are racists, and you're a racist for wanting claymores to have arrows. Like that, it's you kind of get it from all sides.
Bart, you've seen me over the years. You haven't been on every show. Last year or two, you've been really good, and thank you for that. But have you seen some of my confusion when the professor talks about this over the years? Because he has to repeat it to me over and over and over because it doesn't make sense to me intuitively. I don't. I just
So far removed from education that we all went through.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we talk about college, we think, oh, it must be sort of like what it was like when we were there. And I guess in some ways it is, there are still desks. And if you're like you and you were to show up in my class, you would in many ways get a very conventional education, and you might not even notice what was going on with everyone else in the class.
All the other students, because I'm just worried about what you're thinking about and what you're assigning and what I need to do.
But what you might do is, and this is what is very common, is you walk into your first class and you start taking notes, and then you notice that nobody else is taking notes. And then you'll stop taking notes eventually.
Oh, just dumbs down or dumber.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because everybody else is like, I don't ever have to know anything. I don't have to ever produce anything. I don't have to ever do anything, and if I don't, then somebody's going to come to my rescue. Um,
Where are you on this spectrum? Do you totally get Professor Tootle's thoughts and he's right, or do you still have some like institutional confusion like me? Where are you on this?
Yeah, I'm probably halfway between where you are, John, because one of the the difficulty with all of it is that a lot of this comes down to the way in our society today we attack pretty much every single institution as invalid. And the
yeah,
educational system is kind of a huge, ginormous institution. You guys are a huge target. So I think in a way you're a victim of that. And
yeah.
I think what you're relating to us every week when we kind of get into this stuff is that what's happening is your mission is to educate people, and your specialty is history. But when people come at you and they go, well, stop educating people because you're being a racist,
Yeah.
well, what are you left with at that point? How do you?
Yeah, but it's it it's I think I said this a few weeks ago. Like, you shouldn't get into education unless you are really willing to fight against the incentives. Because my incentives, I mean, I'm still, when this podcast ends, I'm going to go back there and finish grading up my last couple of essays. And if I just walked in there and I just gave everybody A's and B's, I would get paid. I would be called a success. I would get patted on the back. And if ever, and if I know I'm looking at maybe a dozen or so emails from students who are all claiming they didn't use AI on their finals, right? And if I just caved on every single one of them, and said, "Oh, okay, never mind," or if I just pretended that it wasn't happening, which is what most people are doing right now. I mean, here's the crazy thing: is 60 or 70% of college students are cheating on all of their assignments now. So, what are most college professors doing? They're just choosing to ignore that it's happening because it seems like an insurmountable problem now. Like, there's nothing you can do about it because the only thing that you could do is going to result in so many problems that there aren't enough hours in the day to solve it.
Is this just a United States and maybe Western Europe
No,
issue?
it's worldwide. Worldwide. Yeah.
So Chinese students are doing the Indian students are doing and South American, they're
Yeah, and most of it's on TikTok. So, I mean, the tools are advertised on TikTok. They're plugins that go and apps that go straight on your phone. And so whatever's happening in America is definitely happening in India and China because most of it's originating in India and China.
Okay. Professor, we're almost out of time. Can you I know we're gonna interview a Trumpy again, a Trumpy citizen that wants to advocate their position for us to contemplate their noble ideas. We also want to kind of do a retrospective of our last show 2 weeks ago because I think he raised some things that were kind of surprised us. And I'd also like to have a liberal or two. I mean, a real socialist liberal or two come in and challenge us. You said
Let's
that.
not let's not confuse a socialist with a liberal.
Well, no, I mean, I know a couple that are clearly socialists. They think they're liberal or Democrat.
But
They're
those
See,
two
John,
things,
I'm
you
probably
can't be both.
a liberal, but not a socialist.
yeah,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
are. That's right. But
Those two things are, John, just
yeah,
in my mind, those two things are mutually exclusive.
yeah,
There's
you're
a
right.
really important distinction. One of
Yeah.
them wants to
So which one
destroy
do
the
you want?
United States, right?
Which one
One
do
of
you
them
want,
does
a
not.
socialist or a liberal?
Yeah, you can't be a liberal and a socialist.
Right. So which one do you want? Which would be more interesting
I mean,
for
I
us?
like both. I'd love to have, if we could get Bloodworth back on here again. He's a good liberal, or Katzum. They're
Yeah,
both.
but you don't want a socialist because it's just
No,
too
I'd love.
boring.
I mean, let's get a socialist on here too.
Okay.
Um,
Because I think there's I don't know, 10 or 20% of America is now socialist, not liberal. I think there's a pretty significant amount that are really
I think it's probably 10 or 20% who don't really know what socialism is.
okay, fair enough.
And there's maybe 7% who are, yeah, maybe it's, I think it's maybe six. I mean, I guess it's maybe 1% are actual
Well,
socialists.
I think you're wrong on that. You don't know enough crazy people. I know a ton of crazy people.
I know a
Uh,
lot of crazy people, but they all tend to make excuses and say that's not socialism. I mean, I think one of the things that has been really effective in getting people to call themselves socialists is I've heard this line over and over again that say, well, you like fire departments, don't you? That's socialism. And
right,
no, that's not socialism.
right. Well, I don't think I brought this up before, Professor, and I'm hesitant to do so. Do you have a minute or two more? Or are you ready to go?
I can do it in a minute or two.
Ah, well, this is too. I don't want to end the show on this. I'll save this for another time. It's just it's
Well, I'll just say I have a couple questions that I always ask people who say they're socialists. And I'll just say, do you think wealth has been created? And do you believe that private property exists? And do
yeah.
you believe that individuals have rights? And how they answer those three questions will tell me if they're actually socialists or not.
Well, okay, I'll say it. There, I was at a kind of covering. I don't think I was a member of this protest because I don't even like protests. But I was at a protest, and the person had a pretty engaging sign. So I went and asked them about it, and they said, "Yeah, billionaires need to be just take all their money, and if not, we kill them." And I go, yeah, you don't actually mean that, do you? I mean, you don't kill people." And she goes, "Yeah, I do." Oh, well, you're like a communist then. No. And I go, well, you just want to take their property, and if they don't give it to you, you kill them. And she goes, well, that's what I want to do. Yikes.
Well, I wouldn't call that person a communist because, communism is complicated. It's a very complicated,
Ah,
it's kind of an insult to communists to say that everybody who wants to kill millionaires is a communist, right?
okay, touche. All right, that's a good point. They're an authoritarian dictator,
I mean, they
terrorist.
could, yeah, we could just say you're, I don't know, it doesn't even get a name. That's a bumper sticker of feelings and violence. Like
Mhm.
that's not an ideology.
Okay, fair enough. Give one or two lines, Professor, on what we really should be thinking about as Americans rather than the deficit and the debt and China and education. I don't know. There's the things that I brought up and the things we discussed. Is there some other big picture that we're not thinking through enough that we should be really concentrating on?
Well, I don't know that I mean, on a personal level, you should always be thinking about what God wants for you. But let's set that aside. This isn't a religious podcast. But I did
Oh,
actually,
no.
I had to end on a semi-religious note. Oh, I wish Jake was here, but I I was at a Bible study a couple weeks ago, and gosh, I wish Jake was here because I was looking up the Westminster Catechism of 1648. Uh,
Wow.
um, Westminster, uh, to Westminster Shorter Catechism, um, and people act like we need new ideas. And one of our discussions was what happens to people if you don't know the fundamentals of your own faith? And so I just looked up, the Westminster Shorter Catechism, right? What is the chief end of man is the question. And the answer is man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. And we act like nobody's ever asked these questions before, but people have been asking these questions and coming up with these answers for a long time. And um, you can benefit from the wisdom of smart, thoughtful people throughout the ages. Uh, and I mean, I think what we should all be focusing on every day is to put this in a more secular um, answer is we should want ourselves to live in truth and to enjoy the process of reconciling ourselves with truth every day. and apply that standard to everything we do. We just want to be living in reality and living in perspective and reconciling us to that and enjoying it. You know, this is not supposed to be some sort of miserable, you know, one of the guys who really inspired me was the great Peter Schramm, and who always said that never forget that scole means leisure, you know, that this is what we get to do. We get to think about the highest and best things that humans have created. And it's a pleasure. We enjoy this. And it shouldn't be a bummer. It shouldn't be a drag. Like, always want to, you know, I mean, anyway, that's what Americans should be doing. That's what people should be doing. I don't have any new wisdom. I can repeat the, you know, Westminster Shorter Catechism of 1648.
Yeah, I think your religious specific as well as your translation into the secular was really nice. I think that's very thoughtful for us all to consider. And we're going to end with that. Thank you.
All right. Good to see you guys. Sorry for my long hair. I promised a haircut before our next show.
Oh, yeah. Well, I promised to clean my head so I don't have to wear a cap. Bart, never mind. Sorry for the
Mark Barber.
I'm like in a post-hair world here.
All right, gentlemen. Very dearly appreciate you. Have an awesome day.
Yeah, have a good Memorial Day too.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
Thanks all.
All right.